Here we are, once again. Another iceberg has been thrown out from the polar ice caps, barely making it in one piece, as it melts along the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. With 143 entries in total, most of these are deep internet searches this time, rather than pulling entries out of my head, off my friends, or from other icebergs. Just like last time, stars on the screen will determine my confidence and knowledge in the subject being discussed, with 1 being completely ignorant and full of guesswork, while 5 is I know extremely well and shouldn't be wrong about it. Before going on, please consider watching the first iceberg before this one if you haven't already. With that out of the way, let's begin. Concepts here at the tip are mostly well known and well understood by people of all ages. Most of these are umbrella terms, isms, and concepts that provide context for what exists further down the iceberg. Centrism can refer to people who see themselves as apolitical or within the moderate coverage of various political corners, never going into the extremes, but rather content in neutrality. Grilling is a popular centrist pastime. Thatcher bad is a viewpoint of many leftists. For a small taste of why she's hated is pretty much she and Reagan helped introduce neoliberalism. She returned the death penalty, destroyed manufacturing industries that led to mass unemployment, and worsened social housing still felt to this day. Colonialism refers to a historical activity of exploiting people and land for capital and resources. The accumulation of capital under colonialism is primitive by today's standards, as it was an activity within the means available at the time, the limits to production prior to later stages of capitalism. Imperialism can be seen as the modern capitalistic adaptation of colonialism, an advanced system of capital and resource accumulation, seen by Marxists as a necessity for capitalists to maintain dominance in world markets, to maintain and grow their wealth. Modern imperialism often creates conditions of financial dependency, where workers in third world countries are forced to accept terrible wages to survive the bare minimum. Transgender people, while not political in themselves or explicitly leftists, since any trans person can have any political belief, many right-wingers see them as such. They are trans because they experience dysphoria and anxiety in response to their assigned gender and its roles and expectations. Some seek surgeries or hormones, others do not. Some change their clothing styles, others do not. The varieties of trans people are infinite, and we've been around for thousands of years, with an early example being transgender priests mentioned in Sumerian and Akkadian texts. Concepts here in shallow waters are more or less well known, but less understood by people who are not students of politics. Oh, what a tease to what exists further down the iceberg. The communist UFO refers to Buzludza Monument, a structure built to commemorate the formation of the Bulgarian Social Democrat Party, a forerunner to the eventual Communist Party. It has a futuristic UFO-like design, typical of the architectural choices among many socialist countries, and is full of beautiful historical mosaics inside. It has been neglected and closed off, unfortunately, since 1989, due to the change of governance. Utopian socialists is an umbrella term for types of socialism that either predate Marx and Engels, or for socialists who reject Marx and Engels' concept of scientific and materialist socialism. Some utopian socialists might favor idealism or philosophies that differ from dialectical or historical materialism, while others may simply envision societies and ideas without doing so in accordance with an analysis of present conditions. Land-back reforms are essentially reforms that allow populations, usually marginalized and previously or currently oppressed, to have their former and subjugated lands returned to them. Some people would like to claim that all land-back reform policies are on the level of racist ethnostates, which is more of an irrationally skeptical strawman, as most land-back reformists just want equality rather than to replace the role of the oppressor. Soviet supertanks. Like most countries, the Soviets were just beginning to figure tanks out, but compared to the competition, the Soviets have some of the coolest and practical, as long as you ignore the glider tank. Object 279 was a heavy tank built in 1959 that withstood armor-piercing rounds, shaped charges, and even a nuclear blast shockwave. Vladimir Levolkov invented the first hover tanks in World War II, which revolutionized amphibious warfare, and the Soviets even had remote-controlled tanks that could attack from 1,500 meters away from the controller. Gender studies is a rebellious discipline that teaches about gender identity and expression, while providing the disciplinary tools to analyze it, and while regarded as a useless degree for its lack of employment provision, some leftists would argue it is seen as a useless degree only because it challenges the status quo. It came about from feminist scholars in addition to the protests and movements brought by the New Left. Missiles in Turkey. Many know about the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when the Soviets tried to put missiles on Cuba, but little know of the fact that the US had missiles near the USSR first in Turkey. Despite almost starting a nuclear war when depth charges were thrown at Russian submarines, the two sides came to an agreement to remove their missiles from both Turkey and Cuba, denying the Posadas the nuclear revolution they deserve. Market socialism is an umbrella term for a variety of ideologies that consider itself socialistic while seeing markets, whether regulated or free, as beneficial. Some of the ideologies in my first video, like agorism or mutualism, can be considered market socialists. Most market socialist ideologies desire workers' self-management, cooperatives, or some form of workplace democracy. Leftists invented Wojaks. Coincidence or not, we can clearly see that these early 1900s propaganda posters from the Soviet Union show capitalist soy-facing while the Chad workers smile on proudly. Tito's Daglak. Josip Broz Tito was the leader of Yugoslavia, a country made up in the Balkans. It tried to rival both the USSR and the USA, while simultaneously benefiting off of both. The Glock refers to superweapons, specifically the EDO-0 and EDO-1 Welt guns, made by Yugoslavia in 1985. To put it into perspective, railguns are still being finalized to this day. If Yugoslavia got theirs to reach the desired projectile speed, NATO might have thought twice before bombing. Cold War contraception. The US was a very considerate country, so much so that the CIA considered airdropping extra-large condoms under the medium label onto the USSR. Assuming all women are attracted to men and that they all want large sizes, the CIA hoped that Soviet girls would see the Americans as bigger and therefore superior. Some ask if straight people are okay. Were they ever? Concepts below the water are more complex and understood mostly by people devoted to politics who have too much time on their hands. Pink imperialism. Pink capitalism was a subject of my first iceberg, criticizing hypocritical corporations that claim to support queer people. As Western countries got more progressive, it has become more common for them to try and justify imperialism when it is against countries known for queerphobia, such as the Middle East. Israel likes to stereotype Palestinian people as homophobic in order to justify oppressing them. Linguistic imperialism is a byproduct of imperialism, causing people to be obligated to know the language of the country oppressing them to be successful. Maybe one day in the future, all humans will share a language, but it is better for people to do it willingly rather than from imperialism. Green capitalism. Green capitalism is called green capitalism for similar reasons that pink capitalism was called pink capitalism. That is, that corporations try to hold up a facade of being environmentally beneficial when they contribute harm to the environment. The whole logic of green capitalism comes down to the argument that it's possible for ethical consumption under capitalism, even though corporations waste more than individuals. Neopronouns. Transgender people, already breaking social norms of what constituted gender identity, opened the possibility of exploring what identity means further. Neopronouns are harder for people to get used to, but the considerate will try. It refers to pronouns that are unique to the individual, excluding the pronouns she, he, or they, because they're more comfortable and make the most sense to them. While non-conforming, anyone can have neopronouns. Frankfurt School Incident. In Part 1, we talked about the Frankfurt School, a German and later Swiss school of Marxists. The alleged incident stems from a far-right conspiracy related to the idea of cultural Marxism, which was largely popularized by a person named Timothy Matthews, who believes that the evil Jewish cabal of intellectual elites is doing Satan's work by initiating a cultural war against Christian Western values in hopes of creating a female-centered society. Women's having rights? How evil! Syndicalism is a type of worker-focused ideology that values concepts such as direct action, direct democracy, and workers' self-management, also seen as an alternative to worker co-ops. Syndicalists are also heavy about workers' unions, and many anarchists have adopted syndicalism, forming anarcho-syndicalism, combining it with state and hierarchy critiques. National Bolshevism is an ideology first proposed by Heinrich Laufenberg and Fritz Wolfheim, who sought to merge Marxist-Leninism, nationalism, and syndicalism together. It can be tied to any nationality or ethnicity, and is really popular in Eastern European countries, generally mixing Soviet aesthetics and culture, and the promises of progressive economics mixed with social traditionalism. Compared to other fascistic ideologies, Nazbols are seen to be more centered around workers' rights, at least in theory. Strasserism. Similar to Nazbols, it focuses on workers' rights, traditionalism, and authoritarian state intervention. Created by Gregor and Otto Strasser, both brothers were involved in the Nazi Party until Gregor was killed by Hitler and Otto exiled to Czechoslovakia. Strasserism believes Jews to be the blame for many problems, like the Nazis, but wants more workers' rights and mass action. Some believe in class conflict, wealth redistribution, and cooperatives. Lost nukes, also known as broken arrow incidents, are the loss of nuclear weapons that hopefully don't threaten the world. One example is the Soviet submarine K-219, which carried 14 nuclear missiles. It went down, and when recovered, all missiles were missing. A conspiracy exists believing the nearby American ship, USS Augusta, had rammed K-219, but the Navy denies these allegations. Others believe it went down from the mysterious nature of the Bermuda Triangle. McCarthyism refers to U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy and his unconstitutional actions against freedom of speech. He had hundreds of people who were accused and suspected of being socialists and communists fired from jobs, charged, and even imprisoned. One could deflect this by saying that the USSR was no better with its purges, but the actions done by McCarthy were allowed and ignored in a supposedly democratic system, until he started accusing the military of being communists. Anarcho-capitalism is, in simplicity, a stateless capitalist society. ANCAPs want property rights like land ownership, capital investment, and private means of production. They also favor markets, national defense, and roads. Anarchists reject them as being a school of anarchism, and leftists argue that the state is necessary to enforce the rights ANCAPs want, nor is there anything to stop capitalists from recreating the state since they're still in power. Voluntarism is a movement in philosophy founded by Auburn Herbert in the 19th century, though the concept is said to originate in the 17th century. Similar to anarcho-capitalism, with its rejection of the state and the support of private property, favoring self-ownership and non-aggression as its principles. Distributism is a Christian socialistic ideology from Pope Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum and Pope Pius IX in quadragesimo anno. It advocates for the world's resources to be evenly distributed to all, and some even want the redistribution of wealth. Most distributists are critical of capitalism and communism, but its criticisms against communism are dependent on believing that communism is when there is a state. Time isn't real comes from a quote that Karl Marx supposedly said, "Time was invented by clock companies to sell more clocks." This quote was popularized by Luke Savage on Twitter and does not come from Marx. Titoism is an ideology of the thoughts of Josip Broz Tito. Like the history of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, Tito shared the compassion for a united Balkan country that stood up to imperialists and oppressors, having the right to self-determination and the identity of a united Balkan people. This extended into its structure and economics, as Yugoslavia stood out from many socialist countries that adopted the Soviet model. Titoism is considered a form of market socialism, with workers' councils that managed companies and had a joint relationship with the state. Due to its independence from the Soviets, it traded and borrowed from capitalist countries, since Yugoslavia acted as a buffer between NATO and the USSR. Yugoslavia lived on quite successfully until the collapse of the USSR, due to intentional actions done by the capitalist countries in order to break the country apart. Agrarianism is a lifestyle ideology that fetishizes living the rural life, usually in support of land rights and farming. Agrarian socialists seek that life combined with a socialist economic policy, land collectivization, division of land to the people, farming co-ops, and more. Most desire a decentralized state with minimum governance. Private politics should be about rejecting modernity and embracing living on a pirate ship, but it's not. It's an umbrella term for various groups and ideologies that generally challenge intellectual properties, such as copyrights and patents, with views favoring things like information privacy, net neutrality, transparency, and free speech. Some groups also believe in using the internet as a foundation for political democracy, called e-democracy. Confederate Stalin is merely about the fact that the man who defeated fascism was born in the sweet state of Georgia. Of course, Georgia refers to the state south of Russia, not the southern state of America. Communist blinders refers to a prototype Soviet laser pistol that came in both revolver and magazine-fed versions. The intent was for cosmonauts to shoot at American astronauts in order to blind them, to cease them from stealing Soviet satellites. It could also disable optical sensors of enemy spacecraft, but the weapon project was abandoned because of Gorbachev's shilling to Americans. Ho Chi Minh thought is basically Marxist-Leninism as defined in the previous iceberg, applied to the conditions of Vietnam by its leader Ho Chi Minh and continued by Vietnam's Communist Party. As an ideology, it saw the peasants as important as the working class and valued independence and anti-imperialism as a part of its core. Ho Chi Minh thought also influenced the country of Laos and theorist Khai Son Phom Vi Han. African Che. In the first iceberg, I briefly mentioned Thomas Sankara, but totally forgot to say anything about him or his ideology. Sankara was considered the Che Guevara of Africa. Che was a popular revolutionary leader who led a lot of fighting during the Cuban Revolution. Sankara was a Marxist-Leninist, which he synthesized with the conditions of Burkina Faso. While Sankara was an anti-colonial Marxist-Leninist feminist, many people and groups consider themselves Sankarists without a shared network or ideology, from fellow Leninists to Social Democrats. Liquid Party is unfortunately not a party about getting wet. It's just a party in the Netherlands that desired the country to be sold to a foreign power like the United States, with the money being evenly distributed to all Dutch citizens so that all could be a millionaire. It was called the Party for the Liquidation of the Netherlands, but I haven't been able to find out its history or how successful it was. Trotsky's Penguin Army refers to the decades-old joke that Trotsky fled to Antarctica from Mexico in order to grow an army of penguins as revenge for the assassination attempts from Stalin. This is because, after he was blamed for the Russian Civil War loss and his disappearance, it was supposedly never explicitly stated that he died. We know this isn't true, because if he really did go to Antarctica, he'd find the entrance to the Hollow Earth and recruit the communists that live there. Concepts here at the crust are reserved for the most devoted, niche offshoot ideas, forgotten or covert. Ideologies begin to dissolve into obscurity, and theories become more conspiratorial. Synthesism starts with the conceptual slogan, anarchism without adjectives, coined by Cuban anarchists Fernando Tarrida del Marmol and Ricardo Mela in the late 1800s, who sought to disrupt internal conflicts between various anarchist ideologies, arguing that preconceived systems, economics, and theories come second to abolishing coercive authority. This took off in the 1920s by anarcho-communists Follin and Sebastian Faure, who used this principle to unite individualists, anarcho-communists, and syndicalists together into the International of Anarchist Federations, putting synthesism into practice. It seems this has not split or died to this day, and has done work like aiding various villages and movements across the world. Expropriative anarchists. While in the previous iceberg I talked about illegalism, the lifestyle of crime, there were similar movements in the 1920s and 30s that committed theft, robbery, scams, and counterfeiting. Yet these movements, which used what was called expropriation of the bourgeoisie, differed from illegalism, as it did crime to achieve real political ends. The Simbayonis were a vanguard-style group of new leftists that were inspired by many insurgent groups in South America who were against queerphobia, racism, and capitalism. They robbed banks, attacked police, attempted bombings, and even supposedly kidnapped American actress Patty Hearst, who later announced over recording that she was joining the Simbanese, though she later claimed to have been coerced and brainwashed to join. Most members were imprisoned, and all but one has been released in 2017. Makhnovism basically describes the actions and history of a Ukrainian named Nestor Makhno in the early 1900s, who took part in an underground anarchist movement known as the Union of Poor Peasants. It quickly gained popularity in the city of Poliapol among peasants and workers alike. While many industrial unions elected Makhno as their chairman, he led them to take over their workplaces in addition to replacing the former police forces. Weapons, goods, and products were distributed to the people, and eventually, they took over a large area of 7 million people known as the Free Territory, or Makhnovia. He and his group had allied itself with the Soviet Russia and its Red Army, only for Lenin to order him to be liquidated, resulting in conflict between the two. Despite many impressive victories against the Soviets, Makhno and his forces were overwhelmed, and he eventually had to flee in exile, with his society crumbling after. Transnistria. One might think this is some society for trans people, but that comes later. Transnistria is a breakaway territory in between the river Dniester and the Ukrainian border. There were tensions between Transnistria and Moldova after the Soviet Union dissolved, resulting in a military conflict that started in March 1992 and ended in a ceasefire. The governance there calls itself the Pridnestrovian Moldovan Republic, though it is still internationally recognized as a part of Moldova. Despite wearing the aesthetics of the former USSR, it is considered a capitalistic society now, with private businesses and even a dependence on criminal activity such as gun running. Trans-ethnostate. As promised, here it is, that aforementioned society for trans people. While sometimes regarded as a meme, there are some unironic people who have faced enough oppression and grew intolerant of it, that they believe the only way to guarantee their safety is for a state that is just for them. This idea is also comparable to Transgenderism, which believes in fighting against capitalism with the establishment of a national trans workers' state. Verlaheim Commune was an interesting social experiment created by a person whose intentions might not have been the best. Estate landlord John Vindelier owned some property within County Clare, Ireland. In order to keep his tenants from joining anti-landlord groups like the Ribbonmen, he had a socialist named Edward Thomas Craig from England to help him establish a communal society that materialized in 1831. This property, some 600 acres, contained all people needed: education centers, medical houses, and even cooperative stores where the residents could acquire the goods they themselves produced. It offered guaranteed work, greater comforts, better housing, no traveling to work, and guaranteed income. All came to a close in 1833, however, as Vanderleer irresponsibly gambled the property away. Irish Soviets. Slightly similar to Rollahain is yet another socialistic Irish group. This includes self-declared Soviets, with the most notable example being in Limerick City. It was managed by the Soviets from the Soviet Union, which happened after general strikes were done by the people at the beginning of the Irish War of Independence. It lasted for 3 years, with its own supply of food and money. Zapatismo. If there is one thing that the Leninists and anarchists can agree on, it's a Zapatista. Inspired by Marxist-Leninism, but anarchistic in nature, there is a de facto independent region of indigenous people in Chiapas, Mexico, known as the Zapatista, who have fought for their self-determination on multiple occasions, constantly defending themselves from the Mexican government and criminal organizations alike. The area is governed directly by the people, making up a confederation of councils officially called the Rebel Zapatista Autonomous Municipalities. It exists thanks to the actions of Emiliano Zapata and the Liberation Army of the South in the early 1900s. Even after his assassination in 1919 by Mexican President Carranza, it didn't stop the people from continuing to contest the area. Things finally settled down in the 90s as the Liberation Army's successor, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, EZLN, started an uprising in Chiapas, maintaining an existence to this day. Nkrumahism is the ideology of Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah. He advocated for all colonial powers and ties to be expelled from Africa to leave room for a completely unified Africa. He was influenced by Marxist-Leninist Maoism and used it with a combination of other theorists to help form an ideology for his country through the Kwame Nkrumah Institute. His goals never saw fruition after being exiled by the National Liberation Council in 1966. Hodja's bunker spam. In the previous iceberg, I talked about Hodjaism, basically the preservation of Stalin's Marxist-Leninism, with many criticisms and rejections of basically every other socialist and capitalist country. This included Yugoslavia. Many associate Hodja and the ideology with Albania's construction of exactly 173,371 bunkers. While it seems almost bonkers and perhaps irrational, we can understand why in his book, Reflections on China, where he states that his old friend Paluku collaborated with the Soviets and the Chinese in an organization known as Push, which supposedly wanted to capture Albania and benefit Yugoslavia. Fearing an invasion from Yugoslavia and being surrounded by enemies on all sides explains why all the bunkers were built. Marxist humanism is an ideology with its origins in the 1920s by both Karl Korsch and Georgi Lukács. They argue that Marxism wasn't a sociological science or just theory about political economy, but a critique, the self-conscious transformation of society. Marxist humanists are also against dialectical materialism, interpreting Marx's framework as an enlightened humanism, that man is the measure of all things, and that humans are unique to the rest of life. It has inspired various groups like the French Communist Party, and even philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre. Comrade Queen Elizabeth. If you thought this entry sounded silly, just wait until you realize it's related to a time when the US and the UK could have gone to war. A part of the English Commonwealth was an island nation known as Grenada, which became a socialist state after a coup. They decided to maintain the Queen as the head of the state, in hopes of getting recognition and benefits. But Thatcher, the Prime Minister at the time, sanctioned them for their coup anyway. By 1983, the US invaded Grenada with the permission of the UK's Governor-General, but Reagan hadn't told Thatcher about it first and had to apologize to her over the phone. Workshy Party refers to Denmark's union of consensuously workshy elements. It started as a joke party founded by 90s comedian Jacob Haggard, who managed to get elected in Parliament, where he took his role really seriously. The party ran on Marxist and anarchist ideas under the slogan, "If work is healthy, give it to the sick." The campaign ran on the promises to have more tailwind on the bike trails, Nutella in military rations, less procreation in the teachers' lounges, better Christmas presents, and more. The longest party. In Czechia, there is a political party that exploited a loophole in naming conventions. It also happens to be a leftist party, supporting some moderately progressive ideas, like lowering taxes in addition to desiring direct democracy. Officially, its name translated into English is this on screen. While silly, it definitely gets attention. Copyleft. Separate from pirate politics, copyleft can be seen as a compromise between copyrights and abolished intellectual property. It refers to an arrangement where things such as art or stories can be used, modified, and distributed freely, as long as the modified and distributed products fall under the same conditions. Sorelianism is an ideology that comes from George Sorel, allegedly a syndicist. He revised parts of Marxism and believed that the proletariat could only be liberated through a general strike, also believing that there is a connection between conflict and freedom. Sorelianism was combined with Charles Maurras's reactionary anti-Semitic nationalism into what is considered national syndicalism, or the first form of fascism. Syndicalists are fascists is a somewhat common leftist belief against syndicalists, stating that syndicalism influenced fascism. Since there were national syndicalists who merged Sorel's ideas with Maurras's, this is probably where the belief started. Some fascists in Spain called themselves syndicalists, and even Mussolini considered himself one, even after allying with Hitler. Syndicalists say such accusations are ahistorical misrepresentations, since all forms of fascistic syndicalism have abandoned the core of syndicalist ideas. Home Depot guns is exactly what it sounds like, weapons that can in theory be made of parts from most retail stores, with the most known example being the Luty 9mm submachine gun. Born in Britain in 1965, Philip Luty grew up to become a symbol of gun rights. In 1996, a shooter named Thomas Hamilton caused a horrible school massacre, which was the first of its kind in the country. The government, however, overreacted by banning gun ownership and creating a mass confiscation of weapons. After 6 months of research, Philip Luty created the blueprints for simple firearms that could be made from easily accessible parts, or even 3D printed nowadays. As if the British government wanted to prove Luty correct in that the state was an institution that acted against the interests of the people, they continually harassed him and threw him in prison off and on throughout his life until he died from cancer of 2011. Poor man. Rand Revolt. You might be familiar with Ayn Rand, but this isn't about her. This is about the 1920s Witwatersrand conflict in South Africa. Gold prices dropped, so mining companies used more black labor to stay profitable. Meanwhile, South Africa's Communist Party recruited white miners declaring, "Workers of the world, unite and stand up for a white South Africa." While supporting anti-black pogroms, they revolted against the government, who responded with 20,000 troops, artillery tanks, and even aircraft. Blankism generally refers to Louis Auguste Blanqui's concept of revolution, that socialism should be carried out by the actions of a small but highly organized group of secret conspirators, essentially believing in establishing a coup d'etat against a capitalist government to replace the state's power to that of the people. Anti-sex chromosomes. Most people have heard of the X and Y chromosome model, but Ian Stedman wrote a scientific and historical article giving the lesson that such a model is flawed, only accepted because it is easy to understand, and popularized by misogynistic and eugenic-favoring movements. The fact that gender stereotypes were infused into traits and genes is a huge political and social bias. Y is not a masculine chromosome, neither is X a feminine one. The XY model completely ignores intersex people as well, who make up 1 in every 100 people. The article argues that there are around 30 types of males, females, and intersex, and that it is time for a chromosome model update. Recycling is a scam. It is about the hard truth. that the recycling symbol advertised on many plastic products was a marketing tool to get people to buy more plastics. People think that it means using plastic products is fine, as long as they send them to be recycled, yet plastics can only be reused so many times before entering the atmosphere or oceans. Experts show that less than 10% of plastics have been recycled anyway, and that the production of plastics is expected to triple by 2050 if global warming doesn't kill us all first. Redneck commies. The term redneck is seen today as an uneducated piece of southern white trash with ancestral tendencies, but the origin of the term comes from the Coal Wars. From 1890 to 1930, there was a period of conflict between workers against their bosses. They wanted better treatment and their right to unionize, but the mining companies responded by hiring mercenaries to attack the workers. To show loyalty to the cause, agitated workers wore red handkerchiefs around their neck. Many of those workers were socialists, communists, and anarchists. Redneck was a slur against them before it was against the South. For many, this is where their familiarity ends, but for this iceberg, this is where the journey begins. The body is the heart of deep political thought, outcasted from even the shadows of the Overton window. Sparrow genocide. You might have heard of the Emu Wars in Australia or the Penguin Wars from Antarctica, but many forget the devastating war between the sparrows and the Chinese communists. Under Mao, sparrows, rats, flies, and mosquitoes were targeted on a large scale for being seen as pests, which they are. But the party was unaware of the negative effects removing ecological niches would have. Locusts started eating tons of crops, since there were no sparrows to eat them. Rather than making the smart decision and killing the locusts, Mao pussied out and imported foreign sparrows to undo the damage. Many blame this for worsening the famine in China, but let's be honest, I'm sure many of us had at one point or another wished for annoying insects to all disappear. What Tiananmen Massacre? Is the belief that in Tiananmen Square, the alleged massacre was made up in an attempt to slander China. It sounds conspiratorial, but the evidence is actually pretty strong. Washington Post Beijing bureau chief in 1989 wrote, "As far as we can determine from the available evidence, no one died that night in Tiananmen Square." This claim was also made by CBS News reporter Richard Roth, BBC reporter James Miles, who was an actual witness, New York Times reporter Nicholas Kristof, witness Graham Earnshaw, and even WikiLeaks. Nazi Maoism. Italians who synthesized Chinese Maoism with German fascism sounds like a joke, but it's not. In 1968, students from Rome's Sapienza University formed a group called Struggle of the People. They desired a fascist dictatorship of the proletariat through a people's protracted war against the current government. The Struggle of the People dissolved in 1973, with some of their beliefs carried on in successor groups. Tito assassinations. I previously mentioned how Castro survived 600 plus assassination attempts in the first iceberg. Tito survived more than a few as well. Because of making Yugoslavia independent from the Soviet Union, Stalin had sent the KGB's predecessor, the MGB, to kill Tito. The first assassin had already killed Trotsky, but Tito survived unscathed. He wrote to Stalin, "Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, one with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send one to Moscow and I won't have to send a second." I'm surprised Stalin didn't die right then and there, but the attempts didn't stop. They went as far as trying to use deadly bacteria to kill him, and even giving him jewelry with poisonous gas inside. Surviving all 22 attempts, Tito outlived Stalin by 30 years. Femboy Makhno. Nestor Makhno was a femboy? Yes! The Ukrainian anarchist military leader was known to employ disguises as part of his guerrilla tactics. His most commonly assumed disguise involved putting on makeup and dressing as a woman, so that he could survey enemy positions without detections. Yes, that's his excuse. This cutie was 1.59 meters tall, which is 5.2 feet for my fellow Americans. Scum is a society for cutting up men. To those who believe in scum, they believe that men have ruined the world. Only women can fix it. In order to achieve scum, there is the Scum Manifesto, providing the groundwork for forming an anti-man organization that can crush patriarchy once in power. It has parallels with Freud's theory, which leaves some to consider it satirical, but there are many who take it seriously. The idea of scum became popularized after a woman named Solanas attempted to murder a man named Andy Warhol in 1968. Democratic Confederalism. I mentioned this ideology briefly in the first iceberg when talking about Murray Bookchin and Rojava. He wanted directly democratic communes that operate in a confederation, which is exactly what Kurdish politician Abdullah Öcalan followed to theorize democratic confederalism. Rojava has a system where people directly elect others into councils that serve different functions. Rather than forcing collectivization, Rojava allows private property under close regulation while incentivizing collectivization. It is very socially progressive and even has a council dedicated just for women to help ensure gender equality. Ba'athism is a type of Arab progressive nationalist ideology founded by Zaki al-Asuzi and Michael Aflaq in the 40s. Syria adopted the ideology in the 60s, which can be called Assadism, named after Bashar al-Assad. Iraq had its own interpretation, known as Saddamism, named after Saddam Hussein. Both have been criticized as authoritarian dictatorships, though the common ideology believes in a unified Arab state led by a revolutionary government functioning under a vanguard party, as defined in the previous iceberg's Marxist-Leninist entry. The Weathermen. Cloudy with a chance of revolution. The Weathermen underground organization were American terrorists from the University of Michigan in the 60s. They opposed the Vietnam War, Imperialism, and were huge Black Power supporters. They got their name from a Bob Dylan song. One of the first activities they did was bombing the Chicago police honoring statue. It got rebuilt and bombed again, got rebuilt a third time with police protection, but bombed again. It was finally rebuilt at the police HQ. Despite being terrorists, they often evacuated civilians before bombing, since they wanted to attack infrastructure for the message, like bombing the Capitol when the US bombed Laos, or bombing the Pentagon when the US bombed Hanoi. They even leaked hundreds of FBI files about targeting civil rights leaders, labor rights organizations, and left-wing groups, which the FBI had to terminate. The Weathermen disbanded after the FBI offered to give minimal charges when turning themselves in. Basque revolutionaries were Marxist separatists in the Basque region between Spain and France. Founded in 1959 with a hierarchical committee structure, their own military, prisons, and treasury, they committed various assassinations and bombings, targeted fascists, politicians, American businesses, and government infrastructure. The group declared multiple ceasefires and temporary dissolutions in the past, but by 2018 it supposedly has officially dissolved for good. Biopower is the power over bodies as invented by Michael Foucault. He refers to nations and the regulation of their people through techniques to achieve population control. It is also connected to the biopolitics, the examination of strategies and mechanisms of human life being processed under groups of authority. It's a way to microanalyze systems of power down to the smallest firms like schools and hospitals in order to potentially come up with solutions to societal problems or to modify or create entirely new systems. Telecommunism. Publishers, film producers, and telecommunication industries conspire with lawmakers to sabotage free networks and to forbid information from circulating outside of their control. Telecommunists believe that the internet involves non-hierarchical relations which contradict capitalism's desire to control. Either the internet or capitalism must go. They want to communize immaterial property, to be self-organized by workers, and are also concerned with copyrights, global migration, and the emergence of the information economy. This all comes from their manifesto linked in the description. Freetown, Christiania. Near Copenhagen, Denmark is an abandoned military area that became occupied by squatters for over 40 years. The area was declared a free city, free from taxes, and even allowed to openly sell marijuana. In 2012, the government sold the government land to its residents, who communally govern the city and discourage private property. Such an anarchist community thrives on to this day. Stranza Commune. On August 18th, 1903, in Bulgaria, guerrilla commander Mihail Gurdzihikov of the International Macedonian Adrianople Revolutionary Organization declared an anarchist commune in the Stranza Mountains. Protected by 2,000 soldiers, they established a system where resources were distributed equally to meet everyone's needs. It was, however, crushed by the Ottoman Empire with over 10,000 soldiers just a month later. Shinmin Autonomous Region. Yet another unheard of anarchist society, the province of Shinmin declared independence from China with the help of the Korean Anarcho-Communist Federation in 1924. They established a decentralized government consisting of a loose collection of councils dedicated to all villages and districts. Unfortunately, the region was contested by both Imperial Japan and the Soviet Union, conquered in 1931. Zamia. From the Vietnamese highlands to the Tibetan Plateau of Afghanistan is an elevated region, controlled by the people of Zamia. It has a population near 100 million, who rejected the state and sought anarchism. China, nor Vietnam, can control Zamia, since it is too out of reach. The communities there are fiercely non-hierarchical and enforce limitations on how much wealth and power a single individual can have. It still exists to this day. Drug praxis. In Sidney Cohen's book, The Substance Abuse Problems, they write there was a heroin and hash problem in West Germany. It's been hypothesized that the drugs come from Turkish and Middle Eastern guest workers, who fly to East Germany's airport and undergo custom checks. Then they'd go to the West without going through checks again. It remains undetermined whether East German officers were instructed to ignore drugs on the workers going to the West. Titoism is an ideology based on Pyotr Tikachev, who was said to be a Bolshevik before the Bolsheviks. It's said that Lenin owed more to Chikaev than any other theorist. He founded an economic determinism, believing economic relationships to be the foundation of all social and political arrangements. He disliked revolt and terrorism by the vanguard party, instead favoring a revolutionary dictatorship through seizing power, which would then correct political conditions to allow a transition to socialism. His ideas also inspired a terrorist group called the People's Will in 1879, which assassinated Tsar Alexander II in 1881. Impossibilism is an ideological belief with a cool name that doesn't live up to it. Inspired by De Leon, who I covered in the first Iceberg, it stresses the limited value of reforms under capitalism and sees such pursuits as irrelevant and counterproductive to achieving socialism. Operation Cedar. From 1959 to 1972, the KGB photographed U.S. power plants, dams, oil pipelines, and infrastructure, doing so from a safe house near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The goal was to plan out a series of attacks on America's power systems in order to leave New York City vulnerable to an attack, including explosives on piers and warehouses along with the port. Concepts here are just barely on the iceberg, just barely fathomable to the common person, but still enough to not be plunged deep into the dark abyss. Communism is satanic. Ever notice how the astronomical symbol for Saturn is a hammer and sickle? Or that Saturn sounds a lot like Satan? That isn't all. In Hebrew, Saturn means adversary or accuser. Etymologists believe Saturn is also an Etruscan deity named Satyr. The Etruscan religion was proto-Jewish. These cannot be mere coincidences, even though the Greeks invented Saturn's symbol and communism hadn't yet existed, nor the concept of Satan, come to think of it. Bakunin the gamer. Despite being an influential anarchist, he has some pretty cringe takes, which got kicked under the rug. He said, and I quote, "This old Jewish world, compromising a single exploiting sect. A kind of blood-sucking people, a kind of organic, destructive, collective parasite." In the same context, he then mentions Rothschilds and Marx, comparing socialism to banks, accusing Marx of wanting a centralized state with a central bank, and because, to Bakunin, all banks are owned by Jews. They will continue to exist under communism, and that is bad, I guess? Immortal Bogdanov. was a Russian who was a revolutionary economist, theorist, philosopher, writer, and even a physician. It's said he rivaled Lenin, but he was expelled from the Bolsheviks in 1909. He invented an original philosophy called techtology, which is the precursor of systems theory. But this isn't what got him so far in my iceberg. In 1924, he transfused his blood with Lenin's sister Maria Ulyanova, with the hopes to achieve immortality and youth. After 11 transfusions, he claimed to have better eyesight, suspended balding, and other positive symptoms. Even a friend of his said he looked 10 years younger. But in 1928, he transfused blood with a student who had malaria and tuberculosis. Alexander died, but the transfusion saved the student's life, albeit unintentionally. While failing to be immortal in the literal sense, he is well known to this day in the scientific community. Prolecult. Immortal Alexander Bogdanov founded an art group called Prolecult in 1918. It had the goal to create a pure culture of the working class. Despite funding from Soviets, Bogdanov requested his group to be separated from the state's control. The party denounced it as a group of capitalists, and it dissolved in 1920, with Alexander expelled from the party committee. Agents and heat. The USSR wanted to make sure that Indonesia's Communist Party remained an ally, so it attempted to blackmail President Sukarno. KGB agents learned that he had a promiscuous appetite. When invited to a hotel in Moscow, agents sent women dressed as airplane stewardesses to his room, which turned into a wild night. Recording the whole thing, the KGB confronted Sukarno with the footage and threatened to release it to the public. Not only did the Sigma male say he didn't care if it got out, he also wanted more copies of the footage for himself. Tito killed Stalin. We know that NGB made 22 assassination attempts against Tito, and we know Tito threatened to assassinate Stalin in return. Coincidentally, the last assassination attempts against Tito happened in the early 50s, and Stalin died a mysterious death in 1953. He suffered a stroke, a brain hemorrhage, and high blood pressure. Coincidence? Khrushchev killed Stalin. Khrushchev replaced Stalin after his death, and when he did, he undid many policies known as the era of de-Stalinization. In a 1963 public statement, Nikita said, "There have been many brutal dictators in human history, but all of them died from an axe, just as they gained power with an axe." Some believe this was a subtle admission of guilt. There was even a rumor that Stalin was going to fire Khrushchev before his death. Beria killed Stalin. Lavrenti Beria was the head of the secret police, and he, according to historian Nikolai Dabruska, feared being purged by Stalin and retaliated with assassination by poison. It's noted he told Foreign Affairs Minister, "I saved all of you officials from Stalin." 3 months later, he was sentenced to death. Socialist Putin. Former KGB agent and Russian President Vladimir Putin is probably not openly a socialist, nor does Russia reflect a socialist economy. But during an interview, when asked what he would do with a time machine, his answer was to prevent the USSR's collapse. Why would a man want to prevent the collapse of a socialist country if not a socialist? And why is Russia then not socialist? The world may never know. George Orwell is bad. Orwell was talked about in the first iceberg. I said he was a socialist because he said so, and because the Animal Farm movie was modified by the CIA. Despite seeing him as a socialist, many leftists still dislike him. This is because he collaborated with British intelligence. Collaborated is a sugar-coated way of saying he created a blacklist of many leftists and specifically targeted black, gay, and Jewish people. Professor Isaac Asimov wrote that Orwell was not affected by the Nazis' brand of totalitarianism, and by the time he wrote 1984, the Cold War was at its height and thus became a matter of topic for every Western patriot. Therefore, many believe that he was a Nazi-sympathizing and opportunistic traitor. Genealogy is the science of women, which I bet interested some of you. It was founded by Abdullah Öcalan to shape Rojava's feminism. He believes that women's freedom determines the freedom of society at large. He emphasized the ability of women to fight with men, which holds true since 40% of Rojava's militia consists of women, including a woman-only branch called the Free Women's Units. All councils must have one male and one female representative as well. The Shining Path was a fanatical revolutionary group that wasn't founded by Stephen King, but by Abimel Guzman, aka Gonzalo. He was a university professor who founded the Peruvian Communist Party Shining Path and adopted Maoism as its ideology. It gained popularity by recruiting at universities, getting support from villages, destroying ballot boxes, and punishing landowners and businesses. Their popularity became notoriety after the party committed many atrocities and massacres. The government of Peru had killed around 29,000 people, while the Shining Path killed around 34,000 people between conflicts. The group has since been reduced significantly. North Korea doesn't exist. I found this conspiracy with little to go off of. Some believe North Korea is a false flag CIA psyop. The CIA did help kill North Koreans, and the US did enforce genocidal sanctions after the USSR's collapse. Perhaps everyone in North Korea left or died, allowing the US to take over in secret. Some also speculate the area is jointly controlled by both the US and China for unknown reasons. The first 9/11. On September 11, 1973, Chile's first democratically elected president, Salvador Allende, died from a US-supported coup. Allende was a socialist who helped nationalize the economy, grew economic sectors, increased wages, and reduced drug abuse with rehabilitation programs and decriminalization. Augusto Pinochet took over and killed over 3,000 people, tortured 30,000 people, and put 80,000 people in concentration camps. There is also the belief that America knowingly ignored journalist Charles Horman, who speculated a US-backed coup before it happened. When it did, he was arrested, interrogated, tortured, and eventually executed on September 19th. Never forget the first 9/11 and its atrocious impact on the Chilean people. Who killed Samantha Smith? In the 80s, young American Samantha Smith wrote to the Soviet General Secretary Yuri Andropov asking if there was going to be a war. He replied that no one in the USSR desired war and invited her to visit his country. She accepted and became a national sensation, an icon of peace. In 1985, she died in a plane crash, and shortly after, the USSR promoted Katya Licheva to be the next global peace advocate. Maybe the Soviets killed her to take the credit of being peace advocates, or maybe the CIA killed her to undo the public's opinion on peace. National anarchism. British author Troy Southgate wanted to synthesize fascism and traditionalism with anarchism in the 1920s. National anarchism rejects the concept of a right versus left, and is an anti-Marxist, anti-capitalist, anti-state ideology that emphasizes ethnic tribalism with autonomous villages. The cringiest part is their desire for no-go areas for unwelcomed ethnic groups. How are you going to do that without the state? Neo-pagan socialism. New Age writer Bruce Lero sought to synthesize neo-paganism with socialism. Neo-paganism came out in the 60s and seeks to reintroduce ancient European paganism, the belief in powers of the world, and a pantheon of deities. Lero believes that individual spirituality, like meditation, is a necessary benefit for the working class. He thinks that materialism can be replaced by moral arguments to support socialism and personally considers capitalism evil. He claims that many pagan groups are structured similarly to anarchist affinity groups, specifically Wicca covens. Also argues that most neo-pagans are feminists, humanists, environmentalists, and overall quite progressive. Longism is, to my disappointment, not about the who has the biggest role in society, and instead is the ideology of Louisiana Governor Huey Long. He was similar to Social Democrats in wanting the rich to pay for social programs through taxes, such as free education, old age pensions, and universal basic income. What separated him from Soc Dems, however, is his desire for reform through corrupt and intimidating means. He was very popular and very charismatic, and was on his way to the state capitol to challenge a judge. The judge's son-in-law, Carl Weiss, shot Huey, and his bodyguard shot back exactly 60 times. Long died hours later and ran out of time to complete his race for the presidency. Madanism is Madan Bhandari's interpretation of Marxist-Leninism for Nepal in 1993. He wanted a multi-party democracy instead of a vanguard party. The Soviet Union politics was already dramatic enough. A multi-party system of Soviets would be a freaking headache. It is also called People's Multi-Party Democracy, and while I found little explaining the system, I assume it probably involves multiple parties checking each other to make sure the other represents the people. Maybe each party competes for votes by doing well to honor their demands. Liberation Tigers were a de facto socialist government in Sri Lanka that wanted to form an independent state of Tamil Eelam, formed in 1976 by Vallapillai Prabhakaran as a response to unchecked corruption, discrimination against Tamil people, and gender inequality. They managed to develop their own military, navy, air force, and intelligence division even, assassinated India's Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi in 1991, and Sri Lanka's President Ranil Singhe Premadasa in 1993, all of this rendering them terrorists by 33 countries. It does go downhill from here. They had suicide bombers, child conscripts, executed and tortured war prisoners, and were accused of massacring civilians. The Tigers are now a shell of their former self since the Sri Lanka government retaliated in 2009. Anarchist Kikuyu. Since the 3rd century in Mount Kenya lives the Kikuyu people. They were once ruled by a tyrannical king. The people overthrew him and installed a democratic system with a tradition known as the Ituyaka ceremony, where a new generation of members would replace the old to prevent corruption and dictatorship. They lived happily, with social equality and without gender stratification, organized a federation of councils directly put into power by the people. By the 1800s, another tyrannical king took over, the British, and all progress of theirs was undone. Human rights. Being against human rights probably sounds like a view shared by bigots and genocide deniers, but this isn't the case. Human rights started with Christianity, but outgrew it and became infused with capitalism's development. Rights existing means the rights must be enforced. Who else will enforce them but the state? This means that anyone against the state should also be against human rights. QAnon is a leftist meme. A priest without a name joined Protestants in 16th century Europe. His adversary was a villain known as Q, a spy working in the Catholic Church to maintain the status quo. This story inspired the plot of Q, a 1999 novel made for revolutionaries by a European leftist group called Wu Ming, which is Chinese for anonymous. The group was an anti-fascist workers' organization. In an interview with some of its members, they revealed a prank on the internet where they made a fake alias named Q, and that would share fake news in alt-right forums. Most of the beliefs by QAnon conspiracists come from Wu Ming. Let this be a lesson against conspiracy theories and idealism. The bottom of the ocean is a resting place, where once the average person struggled to understand such extremes of leftism, they are now in the process of accepting the dark abyss. China's deep state. The Chinese surname Li is one of the most common, making up 8% of all Han Chinese people, and has noble origins with the Tang dynasty. Supposedly, this bloodline is one of the 13 Illuminati bloodlines, said to control the world. The conspiracy suggests that there is a secret Li empire, with some of its members including Hong Kong billionaire Li Kangxing, Chinese ex-premier Li Peng, and Singapore Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. Some conspiracists think that the Li bloodline are Jews, Satanists, or even aliens. COVID whistleblower gone. A whistleblower vanishes after talking about COVID? Could this just be the type of evidence anti-vaxxers need? What does any of this have to do with leftism? Reporter Fang Bin became a whistleblower after putting videos on social media and sharing his first-hand accounts of early infections. The videos started when he realized the government was lying about the situation. After uploading a video of soldiers piling corpses into a van at Wuhan Hospital, his next recording was police approaching his door, and the last video showed a piece of paper with the message, "Resist, all citizens. Hand the power of the government back to the people." He has not been heard from since. Soviet Uyghurs. Uyghurs are Muslim-majority people that mostly live in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region of China. They're involved in the controversial accusations as victims of genocide. What does any of this have to do with Soviets? Before China was, well, China, it was divided into many warlord states. Warlord Yang Zhenxin once controlled the Xinjiang region until his assassination in 1928. Afterwards, the area was fought over by Uyghur separatists and warlord state Kuomintang, who had the USSR's support. Kuomintang won by 1933, with heavy military and economic support from the Soviets. Commander-in-Chief Chiang Kai joined the Communist Party, but betrayed them amidst the Sino-Japanese War. He also killed Mao's brother, and sided with the nationalists. After the war, Soviets regained influence over the region, which they gave to the People's Republic of China. Eerie, but real. Esotericism wasn't just in fiction like Command & Conquer Red Alert. It was something various socialists looked into as well. From 1942 through 1981, a mystic figure known as Georgy Lazanov was sponsored by the Bulgarian Communist Party to conduct empirical research on psychic phenomena, including telepathy, clairvoyance, hypnosis, and his hypothesis. He hypothesized that people only use 10% of their brain capacity, and that an awakening could be achieved to unlock more parts of his brain. Socialist MK Ultra. MK Ultra was covered already, the CIA's illegal experiments on the people, giving them LSD without their consent in the 50s. Some socialist countries also experimented with LSD. Bulgarian professor Boyadikieva was working with the Department of Psychiatry to better understand psychosis. She gained access to LSD to mimic psychotic effects on volunteers. The experiments caught the military's attention, who wanted to see if LSD could be a truth drug. Czech's military also experimented on over 700 patients to see if LSD could be weaponized. These experiments stopped after LSD became illegal in the West, as it was harder to get a hold of. The CIA's project was worse in my opinion. A truth drug is way more innocent than mind control, and at least the socialists had volunteer subjects. Now what I want to know is, when will we weaponize estrogen? IKEA East German camps. Plenty of corporations like Volkswagen, Ford, and Coca-Cola have a Nazi history, and many more are involved in the military-industrial complex. But Swedish furniture company IKEA apologized in 2012 when it was exposed that they used East German prisoners for labor. Some believe IKEA isn't the only company to have benefited from East Germany's prisons. America has private labor prisons, but I guess it's only bad when it comes from socialist countries, right? Trudeau is Castro's son. Justin Trudeau is the Canadian Prime Minister. The one before him was his father Pierre Trudeau, who legalized abortion and imported medicine from socialist countries. According to a report, Pierre and his fiancée Margaret Sinclair were swingers, folks that want to try out other couples. On a Caribbean honeymoon, they met up with Castro and, well, 9 months later, on December 25th, 1971, Justin Trudeau was born. He is 1.87 meters tall, 6 feet 2 inches, and Castro is 1.9 meters tall, 6 feet 3 inches. Pierre is significantly shorter than both of them. Freemason Trotsky. I found an article that suggests some unclear cases, rumors, that Trotsky studied Freemasonry in prison. It says, whether he was a Freemason since 1987 and a member of the French lodge Art et Travail is not proven. It is also claimed that Trotsky had contacts with B'nai B'rith and was a member of the Memphis Mizraim Freemasonry, but these are also not proven. It goes as far as to suggest that when Trotsky gained money in Germany and traveled to North America, he was arrested by the Canadians who suspected he was giving money to a Freemason named Kerensky. Frederick Engels Rosenkreuz is an entry I've been trying to find the meaning of for a long time. The Rosicrucians were a secret order that had a lot of connection to German Freemasons, but they were also pro-monarchy. It doesn't make sense for Engels to be connected to them, since he would have been against both the monarchy and capitalism. The article that mentions Trotsky also suggests that Marx and Engels were introduced to communism from Moses Hess, supposedly a Freemason. Hess himself was a Hegelian, and in the previous Iceberg, an actual Freemason claims that Hegel was friends with Freemasons, but we're grasping at straws at that point. And anytime I try to find sources, I end up finding anti-Semitic articles with no sources. Hive mind collectivism is an ideology that isn't exactly taken seriously, mostly believing in the sci-fi concept of all individuals merging their consciousness into one shared mind. Maybe one day this ideology will have more relevancy, especially if transhumanism prevails. I guess the collective brainpower would be able to be put to good use, thinking the toughest philosophical challenges, and maybe it could exist for good, becoming caretakers of the universe. Orgon is a concept founded by Austrian theorist Wilhelm Reich. To him, it was a universal libidinal energy that was expressed at the climax of a person, and such energy organized mental and physical well-being in addition to relationships. Reich also believed capitalism drained individuals of argon through social repression. Einstein, who himself was a socialist, helped Reich in his research, but when no evidence of orgon was found, Einstein ignored Reich then onwards. Orgon heavily inspired Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, two French leftists I mentioned in the first Iceberg. They reference it in their book Anti-Oedipus, with the quote, "Reich was the first to raise the problem of the relationship between desire and a social field." Surplus value of code. Another concept from Anti-Oedipus, Marxian professor Matteo Pasquinelli says the concept attacked orthodox Marxism and the labor theory of value as being outdated. Labor theory of value is crucial to Marx's criticisms of workers' exploitation under capitalism. Matteo asks about the relation between value and production and extraction regarding knowledge condensed in machines, that is, capital expressed as machinic intelligence, intelligence as fixed capital. Augmented machines are then augmented capital. He concludes that homogeneization is a consequence of global computation of capital, homogeneization being a type of cultural imperialism, where diversity is reduced from popularizing and diffusing cultural symbols, customs, ideas, and values. If computation is liberated from capital, then society can be liberated from capitalism. Action Direct was a group consisting of anyone from libertarians and anarchists to Marxist-Leninists and Maoists. Founded in 1977 by Jean-Marc Roulion, they committed over 50 attacks throughout Europe and numerous assassinations, all against NATO and military-industrial complex members. France cracked down on the group, with arrests against its leadership. Many members are still in prison, with campaigns ongoing to get them parole. 14. Marxism. Charles Hoy Fort was a denialist, anti-science intellectual who founded Forteinism. He believes that orthodox science was a corrupt enterprise that could not explain many things. His friend Tiffany Thayer founded the Fortean Society in 1931, which inspired many to adopt his thoughts, subsequently leading to people defending things like alternative medicine and ufology. And the society was co-founded with Theodore Dreiser, who was a member of the Communist Party USA. If a Marxist was also a Fortean, then they probably reject the idea that Marxism is scientific and might be hypercritical of scientific institutions, professors, and elites. Skin sight. In the Soviet Union's 60s, there was an increasing number of people who claimed to be able to see and feel colors through their skin instead of their eyes. Initial scientific testing confirmed it, until American scientist Martin Gardner challenged it to be a trick and gave advice for researchers on how to spot clues of trickery. Since then, no person claiming to have skin sight was legit. Alternative Soviet parties. The Soviets are often portrayed as a ruthless one-party dictatorship that eliminated political oppositions, yet many parties coexisted during its time. One example is the Neo-Communist Party, which existed from 1974 to 1985. They supported Trotskyism, French leftism, and post-Marxism. By 1985, they disbanded after predicting that the USSR was coming to a collapse, concluding that trying to make a change was pointless. They were correct, as the Soviets did dissolve just 6 years later. Perestroika Deception is a book by former KGB agent Anatoly Golitsyn. He later sided with the CIA, taught them KGB tactics, and provided a list of agents he knew. He also revealed less credible information. In his book New Lies for Old, he claims that the Soviets had a long-term strategy to seemingly abandon hard-line communism through apparent liberalization to deceive the West. 7 years later after he wrote this, the USSR collapsed from perestroika reformation policies by Gorbachev and Yeltsin. Golitsyn wrote Perestroika in 1995, claiming that there are secret Soviet connections between the Russian Federation and the seemingly independent republics. The KGB still exists, despite cosmetic changes, which maintain the myth that Russia is a liberal country. Golitsyn is also known for other absurd claims, like the UK's Prime Minister Harold Wilson was a KGB informer, and that Finland's president was a KGB agent named Timo since 1947. Wander along the bottom of the ocean enough, and you might just slip through the cracks into the Marina Trench. Concepts here bear little to no resemblance to the common world, but are instead twisted into demented figments of reality. Putin Time Traveler. As we know, Putin said he'd prevent the Soviet Union's collapse if he had a time machine, but did you know there was already a conspiracy suspecting him of being a time traveler? Here are some photos that people believes is him. The one from 2015 is, perhaps he is trying to prevent the Soviet collapse. Perhaps he succeeded with the perestroika deception. Some also think he is Prince Vlad III, a vampire who has been alive for thousands of years. Lost in Ukraine. A man wearing outdated clothing was stumbling around lost in Kiev, Ukraine, in 2006, holding a camera. Noticing his confusion, 2 police officers confronted him and asked for identification. He showed them legitimate Soviet documentation that was 50 years old and identified himself as Sergei Ponomarenko. Interrogation revealed that he was born in Kiev in 1932, but was only 25 years old. He claimed that he ended up in 2006 after taking a photo of a UFO. Even his camera roll stopped being produced since the 70s. When interrogators returned, he was nowhere to be found. The windows were barred, and the doors were locked. Investigators confirmed that he went missing in the late 60s. Orwellian future. The guy who wrote 1984 might also be a time traveler. He lived in British-owned Burma for a while, where some speculate he accessed the Hindu Akashic records and was able to use it to time travel or foresee the future. After all, he predicted flat screens and a government using technology to control. Stalin, born in Tartary. This was an entry I struggled to find for the first iceberg. The word Tartary refers to Central Asia where the Tartars lived. There's also a pseudo-historical conspiracy about a so-called Tartaria. The conspiracy comes from supposedly leaked CIA documents claiming that the Soviets made efforts to obscure the truth about the lost empire of Tartaria. The history goes that a Grand Tartaria split into the 3 Tartarian states according to ancient maps. The Empire of Tartary had a flag used later by the Khanate of Kazan, which existed from 1438 to 1552. Stalin comes into this because Georgia would be a part of Tartary. Mongolian Agartha rules China. Agartha refers to the Hollow Earth, a conspiracy that beyond the Earth's crust is an internal world with a central sun holding the planet together. Supposedly there is an entrance to it in Mongolia's Gobi Desert, and in between the border of Mongolia and China is the underground city of Tsinghua. Perhaps China is a surface experiment for those who live below, controlling the country behind the strings. Maybe it was always a part of Agartha. Maybe Mao was from Agartha, or maybe Deng was, when he transformed the country significantly after Mao. Soviet abiogenesis. A Soviet doctor named Chudanov reportedly reanimated fossilized algae off an old rock in 1962. There was an accidental discovery when researching why the salt in Siberia had its color. The ancient algae seemingly came back to life from nothing and started to spread. Chudanov noted it had more silica than carbon in its biochemistry than modern algae. All of this comes from the 1962 New Scientist magazine, which leads to the theory that life comes from non-living matter due to chemical reactivity around hydrothermal vents. Leave it to the Soviets to prove atheism. Communist Manifesto already existed. Conservative millionaire Gary Allens claims that Karl Marx was hired by a secret society called the League of Just Men to write the Communist Manifesto for them after he became a popularly recognized author. This league was supposedly a sect of the Bavarian Illuminati, and Gary also claims that Marx wanted to make a central bank to hold the nation's debt in order to instigate a world war, even though World War I happened because of anarchists assassinating Franz Ferdinand. How a conservative millionaire has any motive to diss communism is beyond me. Kaiser Wilhelm II was a socialist. Kaiser Wilhelm II was the last emperor of Germany. After taking power, he and Chancellor Otto von Bismarck started to hate each other. Wilhelm II became concerned with social problems when miners went on strike in 1889. Under him, he made pro-union policies, increased social wages, improved working conditions, regulated labor relations, and even established Social Security, quite progressive when the US only added Social Security 46 years later. He strengthened arts, sciences, public education, and social welfare through his Workers' Protection Act. It's obvious why many socialists around the world expected Germany to become a socialist country, but I doubt Wilhelm II was a socialist, since he supported Hitler out of the hopes that he would restore the monarchy. Socialist? No. Social monarchist? Maybe. Socialist Tupac's eternal hologram. Famous American rapper Tupac was a socialist, and this is a fact. He had an active role in the Youth Communist League, and his mother was a Black Panther Party member. Some believe he faked his death and went to Cuba with his aunt. Others claim to have spotted him elsewhere around the world. One of the most bizarre conspiracies came after the Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival created a hologram-like performance of Tupac singing at the end of the show. Some believe he was always a hologram, a socialist hologram, and that it still exists to this day. CIA's Wind of Change. The Scorpions were a rock band that sang Wind of Change. Some Americans believe it played a role in the USSR's collapse. The song was played in Ukraine, East Germany, and Russia, so maybe? Journalist Patrick Keefe claims a former CIA officer told him that the song was produced and exported by the CIA. I'll never hear the song the same. Anarcho-communist psyop music. British band Chumbawamba made their most popular song Tub Thumping, which has over 40 million views on YouTube to this day. Not many know that the band members were ANCOMs, who snuck radical leftist messages into the mainstream. In a documentary with the lead singer Dustin Bruce, he says, "At the time, we thought, what can we do with this?" The song itself is evidence of the fact that you can find ways to invade your way into culture. You can use that as a kind of smokescreen to say the stuff you want to say. This song earned the band millions, most of which was used to support anti-corporate groups, like Indie Media and Corpwatch. When General Motors wanted to use their song, the band donated all profits from using it to support anti-GM groups. If the CIA can do it, so can we. Black Volga. Throughout most of socialist Eastern Europe, there have been similar stories of a mysterious black vehicle, often a Volga, that would abduct people. The stories differ on who the driver was, as well as who was kidnapped. The drivers has been told to be anything from secret police to Satan, in addition to rumors of a continent-wide serial killer. While probably just an urban myth, some have suspected it was made by one of the socialist governments in order to make rumors of abductions seem absurd. Blackbird of Chernobyl. Most people are familiar with Mothman, a mythical entity that has been involved in some disasters, which has been said to help people prevent the disasters before they happen. On April 26, 1986, Chernobyl Power Plant Reactor 4 became unstable, until there was nothing but fire and radioactivity everywhere in the city of Pripyat. Locals, who lived near the exclusion zone prior to the blast, claimed to have encountered an ominous black creature with piercing red eyes, and they started calling it the Blackbird of Chernobyl. The locals reported suffering, haunting nightmares, and threatening phone calls. Some survivors share the testimony that such a winged entity rose out of the destroyed reactor's smoke until it flew away, never to be seen again. Doom ecology. Deep ecology, the belief in putting environmentalism before humanity, was discussed in the first Iceberg, but this ecology is deeper than that. Doom ecologists believe that the human race must die, because it would be a net positive to the world. The least we can do to save it: accelerate pollutions, burn us all out, and let none survive but the trees. Chaos anarchism. Maybe you think this is about embracing the chaos anarchy is often mistaken for. You'd be wrong. I refer to the thoughts of Hakim, not the YouTuber, but anarchist Hakim Ray. He's credited for theories of temporary autonomous zones, and boy, does he love to write metaphors into his theories so much that I had such a hard time understanding him. He desires what he calls immediatism, believing that in order to create a new society, everything about the old must be destroyed. He argues against mediation, but rather immediate direct action. New organizations must be formed from temporary autonomous zones because ordinary organizations cannot support unordinary activity. He uses a lot of witchcraft buzzwords like hexes, magic, and chaos, and was supposedly inspired by a religion that believes in a goddess of chaos called Discordianism, which I thought was when you're on Discord for too long.
Is this you?
Where he shifts the ontological foundation of anarchism to an esoteric reading of chaos, where liberation is perceived in the freedom to recreate reality. Soviet UFO sightings. It seems unidentified flying objects have been buzzing around socialist countries for decades. Perhaps Poseidus was right. Many sites are supposedly documented by credible sources, such as former KGB agent Vasily Mitrokhin and Soviet naval officer Vladimir Azhazha. Among all that I've found, here are some of the most interesting ones. In 1947, a shepherd in Kazakhstan reported seeing an object crashing from the sky into a nearby field. 4 humanoid beings emerged from the wreckage and spoke into his mind, claiming to be from the galaxy of Alpha Centauri, and would leave as soon as they repaired their craft. Several people reported seeing a glowing object in the sky fall into a lake in Gdynia, 1954. Polish Navy divers went to investigate, retrieved pieces of wreckage. Later on, a strange humanoid wearing an odd uniform dragged itself out of the water and spoke an unfamiliar language to the locals. Hospital doctors attempted to treat its wounds, but were unable to remove the uniform to do so. It died presumably from injuries, and after its death, it was moved to Moscow, where doctors noticed that it had inhuman organs in addition to extra fingers and toes. One of the most detailed reports was in Voronezh, Russia in 1989. Over 40 people reported a glowing red object around 14 meters in length descending above Lovo-Berlenzny's park. Then it soared away, only to return minutes later, hovering above grade school children, their names on the screen. A hatch appeared from the craft, revealing a tall entity in a silver jumpsuit with an odd-shaped head, only to return to the ship as it landed onto the grass. Then the hatch opened again for 2 beings to exit, followed by a robot-looking thing that seemed to be gathering soil samples. One man started yelling, only for the UFO and beings to disappear, then reappear 5 minutes later in the same spot. The hatch opened once again, this time with a being carrying a tube. A beam of light exited the tube, who instantly disappeared, only to reappear shortly after. By this time, agencies and reporters caught on. Tests revealed radiation and magnetic field anomalies in the area. A scientist named Silinov noted a deep red-colored substance nearby with mineralogical analysis showing it contained unknown elements. As the terrified children were interviewed and asked to draw what they witnessed, They all drew similar depictions. Socialist dolphins. Many connect stars, hammers, and sickles as socialist symbols. Rarely do they imagine dolphins as a part of that. But since the 60s, dolphins became a part of socialist culture. Some believe that they could communicate with humans, contact aliens, and scan things with sonar. Soviet scientists dabbled into dolphins, with many concluding they are intelligent and have their own language and ethics. This inspired New Age religions. Some started believing that dolphins went onto land and became humans. Some believed humans can reverse evolution to return to dolphins. A major influencer of all of this was Igor Tchaikovsky, and it is this New Age occultism that possibly inspired Poseidas later on. Volcanic Poseidism. What do you do if you want Poseidism from the first iceberg, but don't want to nuke the world due to the damage to the environment? I introduced volcanic Poseidism. Instead of relying on dirty radioactive bombs, volcanic Poseidas rely on Mother Nature's weapons, supervolcanoes. The Earth has 12 of them. If these were triggered to go off, it would achieve similar catastrophes like nukes and do good. For one, volcanic gases cause global cooling, undoing global warming. Ash clouding the atmosphere cools the planet down further too. And ash also works as fertilizer to encourage plant growth, all the while disrupting worldwide electrical power, isolating humanity, and shutting down the world economy, just enough for aliens to come by and help humanity rebuild. Anarcho-Agori. If you're in the middle of eating or have a sensitive stomach, please skip to this time now. The Agori are Hindu people, mostly around northern India. They are also dubbed the Fearless Ones for a reason, because they engage in cannibalism to this day. They also consume human waste. That aside, they have been considered a proto-anarchist collective since they lack hierarchy and have a violent history against oppressors. They participated in the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, a revolutionary group that bombed the British infrastructure and also partook in Sepoy rebellion against the colonizers. Killing the colonizers was a plus, since it offered them a meal. As we leftists say, eat the rich. The Sullivans. The next few entries may be triggering as they involve mentions of abuse. You can skip these entries at this time. Marxism, psychoanalysis, and communal living are not terrible concepts. It depends on who uses them, like the Sullivan Institute. They were against the nuclear family concept and favored communal living, but the leaders controlled who became a parent and who could be a parent with who. Such practices aren't communal, they're dictating. Parents did not live together nor with their children. Children instead were encouraged and coerced to engage in promiscuity with adults. Their claims of doing it for science were a terrible excuse, and fortunately, legal investigations led to the group's end. Friedrichshof Commune. Australian artist Otto Mule is a real estate investor who uses his money to find a massive residence in addition to the most infamous pleasure commune. It was advertised under the guise of therapeutic practices, sexual exploration, and a lavish communal resort. Over 600 young intellectual and socialist women around the world were taken advantage of here, from manipulation, pecking orders, and psychological abuse. Despite authorities finding out about his wrongdoings, he only got 7 years of prison. Upon his release, he moved to Portugal to continue the same things and lives on to this day at age 70. The aforementioned Wilhelm Reich, who inspired Deleuze and Guattari, also had personal notes of justifying terrible relationships with children. It was these notes that inspired Otto Mule. Workers' Institute MZT was a Maoist cult that existed in the United Kingdom. It started off as a very sectarian group that was raided by police in 1978. Since then, it went completely underground into secrecy and total isolation. When they were raided again in 2013, what was discovered was repulsively shocking: systematic slavery, abuse, and non-consensual relationships. While I do often criticize the police as an institution, these are rare instances where I am thankful that such groups were put down by them. The Deep Green. Anarchists are often known for a cult of personality, but a group known as the Deep Green Resistance is. Countless members that are no longer in it make such claims, asserting that its leaders, Lear Keith and Derek Jensen, have huge cult of personalities. It's a post-anarcho-primitivist group advocating for the total destruction of industrialization to save the planet. They believe violence is the only answer, since environmentalism has become commercialized, and since industrial waste is more excessive than individual waste. It's been criticized for having hierarchy and has been called a death cult. America lost to Vietnamese dinosaurs. A children's movie called Spinosaurus was created in 1990, supposedly to secretly educate the public that dinosaurs both exist in Southeast Asia and that their existence contributed to the US defeat in Vietnam. Cope. The FBI caught wind of the movie's department and knew it would threaten the US with its falsified history about dinosaurs, so agents posed as critics to make the movie's sales plummet. And it is this movie that supposedly inspired Jurassic Park. In 2016, footage went viral showing a dinosaur flying in Laos, which borders Vietnam. Maybe that is why Vietnamese fighters went underground. The Communist Endgame is a conspiracy from Nesta Helen Webster in her book World Revolution, The Plot Against Civilization. Like many conspiracies connecting secret societies to communism, Webster was an anti-Semitic Nazi sympathizer, but she was also a feminist, so yay? According to her, a German philosopher known as Adam Weishaupt was the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati. He supposedly got into the Jesuit order at a young age but disliked it. Then he created his own society based on both the Freemasons and Jesuits in order to destroy the rich benefiting world that they supposedly built. He wanted to abolish the state, private property, nationalism, and the family, who organized a meeting called the Convent of Wilhelmsbad with the Freemasons, getting them to merge with the Illuminati. They moved their headquarters to Frankfurt, Germany, which is also where the Jewish finance stronghold was built. Together, they were to fund and support theorists and revolutions all around, from the French Revolution to the Bolshevik Revolution. Well, we made it. How many did you know? I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy every second of doing the research on everything from the serious to the most outlandish. I really do love icebergs, and I hope you all liked mine. I'm not exactly planning on part 3, but I'm not against it either. Not until I have a good list of what could be on it. Don't give your hopes up. I hate to be a shill, but making these videos did take a lot of time, so I would appreciate it if you considered subscribing, commenting for the algorithm, and checking out my Patreon. It really means a lot. This has been the Leftist Iceberg Explained Part 2. I hope you enjoyed it all once again, and I hope you all have a really great rest of your day.